Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the annual Father Bernie Clark lecture, this year entitled An Uncommon Search for the Common Good. My name is Bill Purcell, and I'm the Associate Director for Catholic Social Tradition at the Center for Social Concerns, and I'm very excited to have you all here tonight for this evening. This lecture is one of those highlighting our Catholic Social Tradition theme for the Center for Social Concerns this year, which is Pacem in Terris, Raising Voices, celebrating the 50th anniversary of that encyclical, Pacem in Terris. In fact, I'd like to invite each of you, if you would want to participate in March 21st through 23rd of this spring. We're having a Pacem in Terris 50th anniversary conference here on campus, where we're bringing in speakers from the Philippines, from Pakistan, from Great Britain, and from around the U.S. to talk about and give papers on Pacem in Terris and what it means to build peace. And there's actually cards on the table out front if you want more information about the Pacem in Terris conference, or even if you're interested in presenting a paper. Or we're taking proposals until November 30th with that. Just so you know then, this lecture is also being taped. For those, it will be put on the CSC website. So if you know someone who could not come tonight, who would want to see Sister Joan's talk, they can view that at the CSC website. It usually takes a day or so for us to link that. Also on that website, and there's also sheets we've handed out, we always, when we give lectures, it's more than just coming to give a lecture, but we want you to do something when you walk out of here. So we've actually created one-page action sheets of ways to be involved in various ways. And also, if you click on the CSC website for Sister Joan's talk, you can also find about ways to be involved. For instance, a big thing, we just did a gathering a week ago talking about virtuous dialogue. How do we really have conversation in today's society? And so you can see a pledge for virtuous dialogue on that we would ask you to take. And last but not least, let me talk to you about Father Bernie Clark, since this is the Father Bernie Clark annual lecture. And Father Bernie Clark was a Holy Cross priest that not a whole lot of people know a lot about, but he was actually a very, very humble priest who died at the age of 56. He was originally a native of Montgomery, Alabama, not a place where a lot of Catholics are. And he came to Notre Dame and he did graduate work in medieval studies. He actually studied at Notre Dame, studied at Cal Berkeley. He went on and was very involved in several pastoral positions in both parishes and in campus ministry. He was also very involved in dorm life here on campus. And one of the things he did to students was he shared a theory of enough. And that theory said, when he would meet with the students, oftentimes the students come to Notre Dame and they say, we're spending all of this money to get a Notre Dame education. I got to go get a job to make lots of money, right? And he'd ask the students, go and pray about what is enough. That was his first step. Then when he'd had the students come back, he'd say, okay, this is step 2. Whatever you said was enough, you have to hold that now for the rest of your life, and everything else you have to give away. And so that influenced many students at Notre Dame in a very silent way, in a way that actually impacted them, and that impacted people that actually then supported this Bernie Clark lecture. Because of that, that's that money that's coming back in order to provide educational experiences like this, and Sister Joan to be able to speak tonight. That, again, once you've had enough, what is enough, and then how do you live your life? And so Father Bernie was actually a very wise man. I want to now, if you had enough out of me, what I want to do is, since we're having a Benedictine speak, we thought it would be important that we do some Taizé chant to begin with. So I'm going to turn the podium over to members of our folk choir, fresh back from Ireland, who will lead us in a Taizé prayer. And then that will be followed by Father Paul Coleman, our Executive Director for the Center for Social Concerns, who will introduce our honored guests. Again, thank you all for being here.
Please join me in thanking the folk choir. Thanks to Bill Purcell and his assistant, Paula Muller, for pulling this together. The Center for Social Concerns thanks you very much for being here. We are delighted to welcome Sister Joan Chittister to deliver the annual Father Bernie Clark Lecture. A Benedictine sister of Erie, Pennsylvania, Sister Joan has long been an intellectual and moral leader in the U.S. Catholic Church and a clarion moral voice in a number of global arenas. Sister Joan's formal leadership positions testify to the esteem in which she is held. To mention but a few, she served as prioress of her own community for a dozen years, also as president of the Conference of American Benedictine Prioresses, and as president of the Leadership Conference of Women Religious. She currently serves as executive director of Bennett Vision, a resource and research center for contemporary spirituality. She's also co-chair of the Global Peace Initiative for Women, a partner organization of the United Nations, facilitating a worldwide network of women peace builders, particularly focused on Israel and Palestine. And she's worked in a number of other global settings with international religious and other leaders seeking to address some of the world's most pressing problems. In addition to her leadership and activism, Sister Joan is also a scholar who brings her learning to bear on contemporary human issues linked to spirituality, focusing in particular on peacemaking and a variety of other global challenges. She received her doctorate from Penn State University in speech communications theory and also a master's in theology from here at Notre Dame. She was elected fellow of St. Edmund's College, Cambridge University, as well as named a distinguished graduate of Penn State and of Mercyhurst College and of our own university. Drawing on her erudition and what I think is a really remarkable ability to read the signs of the times and to communicate faith in a compelling way for today, Sister Joan has written more than 45 books. These cover topics ranging from commentaries on spiritual classics to contemporary spiritual issues, from global peacemaking to dialogue among and between religions. And she's also spoken in a variety of global venues on behalf of peace building, gender equality, and global justice, joining stages with figures like the Dalai Lama, urging the virtues often of varied forms of monastic life as resources for global peace and justice. She has received numerous awards for her scholarship and her advocacy on behalf of global peace and justice and the well-being of people everywhere, especially women. On a personal note, I first met Sister Joan Chittister 22 years ago. She was kind enough to pretend she remembered. I was a deacon serving in a local parish here in South Bend, Indiana. And I was in a group of people who were newly in full-time ministry, and we reflected every few weeks on our new experiences in light of the education we'd received in graduate theology here at Notre Dame in our Department of Theology. She was kind enough to join us for an afternoon presentation and very frank and enjoyable discussion. I recall being both challenged by her words and her witness, and comforted by her obvious faithfulness and courage. I carry around good memories of that afternoon, and I'm really delighted now to invite her to address us in the annual Father Bernie Clark Lecture. Let us give a warm Notre Dame welcome to Sister Joan Chittister. Nice to have you here. Let me help you with that.
Yeah, we should do that. Yeah, I get really nervous when I hear introductions like that. But I must admit, when you get one like that, you wish, I find myself wishing my mother were alive. She'd believe it. One thing that they make perfectly clear to me, if not to anybody else, is that I haven't earned a decent living for years. Get myself a day job. I don't like to leave false impressions, however, for anybody at any time. So if you don't mind, I want to thank you, Paul, for trying, but I'd really rather give my own introduction. We have one back in Pennsylvania where they talk about a rabbi and a priest who went to the local prize fight together. And when a little Jewish boy got in a ring, he jumped up and down, he flexed his muscles, he beat on his chest, and he went to his corner. And when a little Catholic kid got in the ring, he jumped up and down, he flexed his muscles, he beat on his chest, he made the sign of the cross and went to the corner. The rabbi looked at the priest and he said, "Is that going to help him?" And the priest said, "Only if he can fight." So I want to thank you for trying, Paul. It was nice. I've prepared tonight's lecture from two perspectives. One from the writings of Teilhard de Chardin, who says, "The only task worthy of our efforts is to construct the future." The only task worthy of our efforts is to construct the future. And then finally, from the perspective of a pastor in a small Appalachian church, in a basement church down in the mountains of Appalachia, who new and enthusiastic and filled with the Holy Spirit, went in one morning and he said, "I know what this here church needs, and I intends to get it for us. What this here church needs is a chandelier." And the old man sitting back under the coal-blackened window at the farthest end of the church yelled out, he said, "Pastor," he said, "I completely disagrees with you." He said, "In the first place, we got nobody here who could spell it to order it." He said, "In the second place, if we did have one, we got nobody who can play it." And he said, "Anyway, what this here church really needs is light." Now, the point of the story is this. We are all given to the temptation to use words differently and think we're all using them the same. So tonight I want to spend a little time sorting out some words, most of all perhaps the whole concept of, quote, the common good. To celebrate the 50th anniversary of an encyclical called Pacem et Terris brings us to the very heart, not only of what it means to be a Christian, let alone a Catholic, but what it means as well to be a citizen of the United States in a time like this. In every single presidential election cycle, we enter as a people into the centrifuge of one of the oldest debates and at the same time one of the most pressing contemporary questions in the life of this country. And that question is exactly what, as a people, are we about? Is such a thing as a common good even possible in a world such as ours? And if so, out of what cloth can we possibly create it? I heard two stories recently that I think put those questions in perspective and may provide a guide to their answers as well. Holy One, a student asks the elder, why is it that so many come to the desert seeking a good life, and yet most of them give up very quickly and return to the city? The elder thought for a moment, smiled, and said, "Last evening, my dog saw a rabbit running through the bushes, and he began to chase it, and other dogs then joined the chase. After a while, though, the dogs got tired, and many of them began to drop out of the chase. By morning, only my dog had continued the hunt. Do you understand now why some stay, but so many go?" And the young disciple looked up and said, "Well, actually, no." And the elder said, "Why? It's simple. My dog saw the rabbit." Point. If you don't know what you're looking for, if you don't keep your eye on the end, you will never persist long enough to achieve it. The second story is about Tetsugen, a devotee of Zen, who realized that the Japanese would never embrace Buddhism if they could not read the teachings. So Tetsugen decided to publish the Buddhist sutras in Japanese characters, a project that would take many printing blocks and cost a great deal of money as a result. So Tetsugen began to travel the length of the country, collecting donations that came in very small, hard-earned coins. 10 years later, Tetsugen had barely enough money to begin the printing process. But just then, the Uji River overflowed and famine followed. So Tetsugen took those funds, the ones he'd collected to print the sacred books, and he spent the money to feed the hungry. And then he began collecting all over again. Several years later, an epidemic spread over the country. This time, Tetsugen gave the money away to care for the sick and the dying. And the third time he went begging, it took 20 years to get enough money to finally publish the sacred texts. Those printing blocks, which produced the first edition of Buddhist sutras in Japanese, can be seen today in Obaku Monastery in Kyoto. But we're told that when the Japanese take their children to see them today, they tell them that Tetsugen really made 3 sets of sutras, and that the first 2 sets, the invisible ones, the ones that in which there were healthy people and rebuilt villages, actually surpassed the last ones. Point. When you know what you're looking for, it becomes the driving force behind everything else in your life. And I read all of those stories in the light of Parchment in which John 23rd, in talking about peace, does not talk about war. He does not talk about militarism or nuclear treaties or cruise missiles. Instead, in 176 paragraphs of that encyclical, he talks 48 times about the common good. So there it is. That is the whole lecture. Without the common good, there will never be peace and certainly no justice. Welcome, then, to this rudderless world of multiple needs that Tetsugen, the Holy One, and John 23rd have left behind for you and me to figure out and deal with this time. The fact is that the issue of the common good is of such importance that it plunged de Tocqueville and James Madison onto opposite sides of the question of what it is and how to get it. It riveted the founding fathers 200 years ago, and it clearly confuses this session of Congress now. It has plagued political philosophers and economists across the centuries, and it continues to do so to this very day. It is the holy grail of politics, this thing called the common good. But what is it? A common good is a vision of public virtue, which engages the individual citizen, energizes the government, shapes the public system, and points the public direction in all its policies, all its institutions, and all its legislative intents. The common good is the answer to the question, what is it that we all want for this country? What is it that we perceive to be really good for everyone? And how should we go about getting it? Well, it may have been easy to define a common good in the tiny city-states of Greece, or even easy under the direction of strong imperial leaders in Rome, or in theocratic Europe where church and state were one. But after the Reformations of the 16th and 17th century split Europe in two, in both church and state, the very notion of one single overarching definition of a common good began a timber at a time to split with it. Whose common good would the common good now be? In fact, which common good will we ourselves have in mind as we go to our own election stations in November? Will it be the common good that is defined by majority vote? But then what about the minorities, gays, people of color, women, that do not see that what is good for wealthy, white, heterosexual males is also as good for them? Or will it be the one that is shaped by economic differences? But then, where does good lie? When you take money away from one people who earned it fair and square to give it to people who didn't earn it at all. For some today, the common good is what contrary advocacy groups manage to impose on the whole group as a whole. But then, how successful have we already seen that one to be when the nation is forever under pressure from competing groups that are hostile to compromise to begin with? Others surely will want a common good that protects us from the rise of tyrants by reducing bold ideas to the least common denominator. So nobody's happy, but everybody's unhappy together. Then what will happen then to the kind of creativity that risked the 4th of July and laid railroad tracks across a sparsely populated nation and later went to the moon, and tonight as we sit here is roving around on Mars? Or is it the kind of common good that seeks to melt down the stubbornly unmeltable dimensions of culture, religion, and worldview into one homogeneous mass? But then what will happen to the United States that absorbed all of us and made our differences one, yet not indistinct? The truth is that all of those possibilities are on order tonight. All of them exist one place or another as we speak, and all of them claim some kind of public allegiance, and all of them have both succeeded and failed over time. Have we ever seen them? Have you ever seen them? Of course we have. Of course you have. No matter how young you are, of course you have. Monarchy after monarchy, based on the divine right of kings, however sincere, has failed. One after another of the great European royalties fell to assassination or revolt for lack of a common good. And their modern successors, Baby Doc in Haiti, Kosciuszko in Romania, Idi Amin in Uganda, Mubarak in Egypt, among others, have all fallen likewise. And with them went the people, until there was little more left of the people than the ashes of their anger. How can we possibly have a common good where the good of the ruler comes before the good of the ruled? Socialist states too, Russia, China, North Korea, Vietnam, based primarily on economic goals, pledged themselves to the common good of state control, and then finagled the people to exist for the glory of the state rather than commit the state to the welfare of the people. And they either fell or failed to thrive. All across the world, people were left disheartened and depressed, undeveloped and unhappy, without either hope for the better or the kind of confidence it takes to create it themselves. Only constitutional monarchies, republics, and democracies based on a commitment to communitarianism really set out to embrace the ideals of Plato and Aristotle and Cicero that strongly held common visions of a life worth striving for every member of that society would also make for strong and visionary countries. But the truth is, read your newspaper, even those countries, even we, are having a difficult time now framing a common good anymore in a country once totally devoted to universal possibility, but is now forever walking through its fractured shards. Instead of a common good now, we seem more inclined to talk about the general good, as if we're willing to let some people out of a right to it. Or we talk about the public good, meaning natural gifts that benefit all of us equally, like air and water and good order, if, of course, we have the good fortune to find air that is pure and water that is clean and land that is toxin-free and resources that are sufficient to afford any of them. Oh, no doubt about it. The universal and age-old notion of the common good is an endangered species these days. The question is why, and the answers are legion. Pluralism and the diversity it brings right in front of me tonight breeds fear of the very differences that can bring us rich, new insights about the Commonwealth and great new gifts to give it. In a multicultural society, we worry about whose culture will prevail, whose idea of the common good will finally win out here. Protestant and Catholic and Jew were hard enough to melt and meld, but now the voices are not just different from us, they are in many cases totally unlike us. How can we possibly make common cause, some people worry, with strangers from strange places who can't begin to imagine the amount of education and involvement it takes to assure equal rights for others as well as a living for themselves? Or others say perhaps, how can we make common cause with these Anglos who have never known the oppression we have known or what it is to be paid slave wages? Or others may be saying, how can we possibly make common cause with people from another spiritual planet whose customs are unknown to us, whose foreign dress in a secular society unnerves us, whose morality is unclear to us, if not totally other? And how do we know? How can we possibly make all these worlds come together in one common vision for one common good? When Europe divided over religion, it divided regionally. Protestants to the north, Catholics to the south, Jews wherever they could live quietly and be unnoticed. When the globe began to fracture after World War II, it fractured neatly. There was the free world and the communist world, the Western world, the Muslim world, the African world, and the Asian world. Then the common good began to be understood as the evangelization of all those other worlds into Western values and culture, except that it didn't happen. What once divided areas naturally, language and geography and religion, thanks to air travel and education and technology, are all illusions now. They're all gone. They're memories, perhaps. They're obstacles, maybe, but they're not geographical boundaries. On the contrary, our borders are seeping like sieves. Ask the Roman Empire what happens next. Instead, we find ourselves now in the middle of a nation, citizens of a nation, with a global profile far beyond our Irish, Polish, German, or Italian forebears, and in the middle of a globe to whose peoples everywhere we now have new national connections. Now in this country, our own size has tripled since the days of our once glorious claim to national isolation. Our own social landscape is now multicolored and multi-tongued. Walk the streets of New York if you don't believe me. And yet our own various peoples are becoming more and more voluntarily segregated. And cultural differences have multiplied to such an extent that we are now struggling to become one again, to become again one nation under God with liberty and justice for all. And all of that in a world that is grossly disunited, but also, ironically, inextricably linked technologically, economically, and now, thanks to Facebook, even socially at the same time. But Pacem Terrace gets clearer every day. It reads, "The fact that one is a citizen of a particular state does not detract in any way from his or her membership in the human family as a whole or from their citizenship in the world community." People in barrios in the Philippines and in tents in Port-au-Prince, on dung heaps in India, and under corrugated iron in Africa are watching street corner television, and they see our 8-lane highways choked with cars and hear us worry about a 5% drop in the stock market while their infants die in their arms. Indeed, globalization homogenizes the world, turns it into one great heart, aching for a common life, a common vision, a common good, but it fragments it too, and it shakes us to the center of our souls. The great new world of the post-war period, with its promises of peace, its vision of technological miracles, and its taste of economic security for anyone, has given way to an Alice in Wonderland reality for everyone. We are peoples born in a white Western Judeo-Christian culture that we are watching become more brown, more Abrahamic, more Eastern, more polyvalent every day. And that shakes us to the center of our souls. First, we came face to face with the scope and the implications of the Holocaust. Then we came to realize the ultimacy of atomic warfare. Then we grappled with the shame of Vietnam. Then we watched the doomsday clock tremble closer and closer to the end time of a Cold War. Then we counted the bodies left over by the new methodical process of ethnic cleansing. And then we watched in our own living rooms as the center of Manhattan burned to the ground, attacked by no high-tech weapons at all, except 2 of our own commercial airliners. And in response to that murderous act, the death of over 3,000 Americans, flailing in rage in any and every direction, we killed at least 4 times as many of their innocent as they had managed to kill of our own. As a species, as nations, as peoples, as persons, as the students of tomorrow, clearly we have discovered we were all capable of the unthinkable. And then we understood there are no innocents anymore. There are no such things as non-combatants. We are all at risk, and we are all one, whether we know it or can articulate it or not. These are not simply changes on the social landscape. These are issues that change our very understanding of ourselves, of who we are as human beings, as citizens of anything. They change the shape of our lives. They challenge the very fabric of our souls. They test the possibility of a common good, not only everywhere else, but here as well. Is pathological individualism the only thing this culture will have to offer a world that has managed to create a common technology, a common economy, a common humanity, but has yet to articulate a common good by which to judge its own policies and raise its children in the future? But where can we possibly go, you and I, people like us, who hold no authority, who do not sit at the tables that make these decisions? Where can we possibly go, then, to find that great grail again, if not to a set of principles common to all cultural backgrounds, engraved on all human hearts, at the base of all human longing, and as the fulfillment of all human hopes? My suggestion is that we look again into the core of the spiritual tradition the children of Abraham hold in common, to find the elements of a common good, to find a direction that transcends the differences of cultures and creeds, of social circumstances and social barriers. My suggestion is that we look again at what the world may too easily dismiss as poetic piety, that we may too easily dismiss in our churches on Sunday as poetic piety, and so fail to see in it a seedbed for the reemergence of the common good in the 21st century. This model is at the beating heart of the Jewish scriptures in Isaiah and Ezekiel, in the Psalms and the prophets and the Proverbs. It is as well a clear stream in the Quran, and most of all for us, it is articulated as a lodestar of human development in the Christian scriptures. Scholars call it the Sermon on the Mount. I call it a constitution for the creation of the good community. Until we say that good community is precisely where, as a people, we want to go, unless that's the rabbit we're chasing, we will not stay in the chase. Unless or until we say that good community is precisely where, as a people, we want to go, there's little hope either for national unity in this newly pluralistic population of ours, and even less hope for human unity in a world of historically competitive tribes. Parchamenteris tells us unblinkingly, we are the community of all peoples that is urgently demanded today. It is, I think, in Jesus' famous Sermon on the Mount, in which in this complex word and world lies a charter of human behavior, the very backbone of communal happiness. This country of ours created a Magna Carta of humanity based on the inalienable rights embedded in the good creation of a good God that has become the standard and model for equality everywhere. Now, you and I, in our generation, in this election and in everything we do, must draw a template of human relationships from the will of that same good God who made us equal and wishes all of us well and not woe. Now we must find a way for equal but different peoples to live together on this globe in a world more united and at the same time more disparate than ever before in history. Harper's Index for December 2011 tells us that we have sent 100 Bibles to the moon. The question is whether or not we are using them here. That might teach us anything about what it means to transcend differences by bringing differences together in common commitment to one great sweep of human aspiration. Consider again for a moment, before the political dimensions of this electoral year consume us, what we have come to know as the spiritual dimensions of happiness, which we call the Beatitudes. It is these 8 attitudes toward life, which great spiritual figures in every tradition, and certainly in our own, tell us will, if we commit to them, give us a national sense of deep and abiding fulfillment and endow us as well with the enduring sense of personal happiness that comes from being our best selves together. But for that to happen, it means that we have to look at them newly now. We have to look at them freshly, and we have to look at them more deeply than ever before. Elias Shakur is a Melkite archbishop. He's a writer and native Aramaic speaker. He teaches that the Beatitudes, as the West has interpreted them, are strikingly different in Aramaic. I don't know how many of you may have seen a translation of the Our Father from Aramaic to English. You would not recognize it. They do. They know exactly what it is. The same thing happens, it seems, when they approach the Beatitudes in Aramaic, the very language that Jesus spoke. It's very important for the West to remember, Shakur points out, that the Beatitudes are not prayers of supplication for gifts not yet given. The Beatitudes are not the spiritual quid pro quo of a capitalist Christianity, as in, blessed are the poor because they'll get rich. Be as poor as you can on Tuesday because the stock market's coming in for you on Wednesday, honey. If you're doing your poorness well enough, you've got it made. They are not, in other words, spiritual bribes. They are not meant to be childhood teaching exercises, as in, Tommy, if you take the garbage out every day, you can have ice cream on the weekend. No. The Beatitudes, Shakur says, are about what happens within us as we live them. They are, in other words, a blueprint for a good life, for a happy life, because there are some things we have to learn again that are simply their own reward. The Beatitudes are Jesus' affirmation of what it is to be of God. They are not about asking to be blessed. You'll be blessed with this, you'll be blessed with that, you'll get that gift, you'll get that gift. They are, Shakur says, about what it means to be blessed. Blessed, which translates in Aramaic as blissful. You'll be full of happiness. Live this way, and happiness is going to pour over your life like you never imagined. It's this kind of common good, Jesus says, that cannot be measured by power or accumulation, control or competition, by composing our worlds only of ourselves and pitting our lives against the good of all the others. On the contrary, Pacem Terraces teaches quite clearly we are meant, quote, the encyclical says, to work for one another's welfare. What would happen in this country if we all got up tomorrow knowing that the work that we're doing is not simply for us, it is meant to bring welfare to everyone. We all get welfare. We just refuse to admit it. Happiness resides, Jesus says, in developing 8 basic attitudes toward life. If there's something missing in the happiness you're looking for, either in yourself or in this nation, listen well, because it may surely be here. Happiness lies, Jesus promises, and the prophet Isaiah assures us, and the prophet Muhammad requires, in becoming poor in spirit. Now, it's easy to reduce this particular beatitude to a concern for personal simplicity and interior virtue, a kind of a spiritual jacuzzi, because it is, in a sense. I don't put on airs if I'm poor of spirit. I don't live waiting for more or for things I don't really need. I understand that to go through life lusting for more things, more power, more status, more prestige, when I already have plenty of those things, is to be forever unfulfilled, always exhausted by striving for more. We would certainly, Jesus promises and the prophets proclaim and Muhammad teaches, be a lot happier without that constant sandpaper of insufficiency irritating our souls. But being poor in spirit is much more than that. To be poor in spirit in this country, in this world today, is to begin somehow to truly understand what others do not have, but need, and what we have, but do not need. Pacem Terraces says of this, quote, individual countries, remember this on election day, cannot rightly seek their own interests and develop themselves in isolation from the rest. Now we're going to take a test. You can't come to a class at Notre Dame and not get a test. So here it comes. Now, and I want you to do it nice and seriously. Your sister will always know. And if you wind up sticking your tongue out, it's your own fault. This is the Heilbronner test. I think, having seen a considerable part of the rest of the world myself, it is one of the best measures we have of the creeping inhumanity of the human condition and our own place in it. Now, this is what I want you to do. If you want to close your eyes, it's okay, I'll wake you when it's over. Heilbronner asks this: what would it take for the average American to live the lifestyle of the poor of the world? I want you to put yourself now in front of your own house. Wherever you came from tonight, wherever you call home, be there now. Now, I'm going to conduct a tour through your house with you, and I want you to do it as I say it. Go to your home. Take out everything in it. Beds, chairs, lamps, TV sets, silver. Get rid of all of them. Look around the house. What's left? 2, you can leave a few blankets, a table, and a wooden chair. 3, now take out the bureaus and all the clothes that are in all of them. You can leave, for each member of the family, 1 article of clothing. The head of the house can have 1 pair of shoes. 4, take all the appliances all of the appliances, including the slow cooker, out of the kitchen. Leave a bag of sugar, a bit of salt, a few potatoes, a handful of onions, and a dish of dried beans. Take away the meat. Go to the pantry and get out all the canned goods. Go back for the crackers and the candy. Now, go into your bathroom. Shut off the running water. Turn off the electricity in the house. Now take away the house itself. Finally, eliminate the phone, the newspapers, the fire department, the hospitals, the paved roads, and the doctors. And oh yes, your children's schools. Now tell me, righteous one, what you will do to work harder and improve your life. Now ask yourself what that has to do with the common good that we ourselves say we're trying to define. Surely our own common good must have something to do with seeing that at very least our own national goals do not make this worse for people. John 23 tells us, quote, states cannot lawfully seek the development of their own resources, which brings harms to other states. It is for the sake of the common good that as a people we commit ourselves to not hoarding the world's resources for ourselves. We must come to understand that independence is now impossible, that we are all in this together. When the oceans dry up and the species die and the forests are not there, trust me, whether you live near an ocean or a forest, you are going to feel the effect of that. We must learn the meaning of enough, Father Bernie, so that others may at least have the basics. We must ask ourselves again what we really mean by the common good when it applies to someone besides ourselves. Happiness lies, Jesus says, in being human enough to mourn for the plight of those who are living those inhuman lives tonight. No grief in your soul tonight? Now? Then there is no consciousness of the common good yet. To be unconcerned about the effect of our own actions on the lives of others is surely to fail the common good, to be choked by national narcissism. Providing just wages for those who do the manual labor or service work of this society and every society will only enrich our own lives in the end, while we watch Indian children from the ages of 4 to 17 work 70 hours a week for 17 cents an hour to make our shoes and our jeans and our shirts. We practice, while we decry the pedophilia on our own children, we practice economic pedophilia on theirs. It is the rise in the social status of the poor that will enable them to paint their houses and care for their own children and plant the flowers in their yard that you want them to, and so raise the quality of their neighborhoods and therefore the quality of our neighborhoods and the rest of the city. We knew that once. In 1961, American corporations paid 40.6% of profits in taxes. Today, they pay 10% of their profits in taxes or less. While the median household wealth of white families has dropped 16% since 2005, the median household wealth of Hispanic families during that very same period has dropped 66%. What is that saying about our notion of the common good? Happiness resides, the Beatitudes teach, in being meek, in being humble. But the notion of exceptionalism dies at that point. Each of us is part of those others. Every nation is simply one more people trying to live right, trying to live well, trying to live in a way that my living does not destroy yours. When, as a nation, we treat smaller countries as equal partners in negotiations that affect their own future, humility then forges the bonds and makes our alliances far beyond the effects of money or oil or force or intimidation. Using stereotypes to determine our alliances, either personal or national, can only make international goals and common good more difficult to achieve. For instance, the confirmed number, says the CIA and FBI, of terrorist plots against the United States perpetrated by Muslims in 2010 was 10. The number of confirmed plots perpetrated by non-Muslims was 26. But guess who we pick up for questioning when there's a rumor of danger? Like the small countries of Europe, whose people saw the United States after World War II as bearers of good and liberators from evil, the common good of the world depends now on our liberating this generation from servitude to our own goals and ideas while we disregard theirs. There are countries on this earth going underwater, and we can't name them, and we don't know that it's happening, and we really do not mourn it. Happiness comes to those who are merciful, the Beatitudes teach, for then they shall receive mercy. They taught us in grade school to be good winners, but it takes about a lifetime later to make that lesson really clear. Those who turn winning into vengeance, we come to see as we age, turn themselves into less than whole human beings. When we use the sins of another to treat them as less than human, it turns our own errors into targets that we will wear for life. This world has not forgotten our own fall from grace. Torture. I never thought I would live to see this in my life. I can't believe that in my lifetime it has happened. Torture is now debatable in the United States. And 54% of us think it is sometimes often justified. That tortures the historical values of this country. That tortures the ideals we say as citizens we hold. As long as Guantanamo remains open in the minds of our enemies and the souls of our friends, whom we made collaborators in the very acts of war we had once argued to demonize our enemies, we are now just like everybody else, no better, unfortunately, often worse. Is this the new soul of the United States of America? And if it is, on what grounds will we castigate those who ply the same trade in the future on American bodies to come? Is this our new common good, our new unexceptionalism, the one we're leaving behind for our children and this generation of students to deal with because we have not, will not, do not? Those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, the Beatitudes say, will be both happy and satisfied. They will persist in the commitment for righteousness until at long last, once again, righteousness, justice, and humanity stamp made in the USA over everything we do, over every product we sell, over every piece of legislation we pass, over every human right we protect everywhere. Then the America that brought freedom and justice for all to a city near you, to a country far away, to the measure of everything we do, will rise again, a new Eden, a city on a hill, a light for the peoples. Until then, we must, each of us, refuse to let go of standards that require us to demand an equalization of black and white prison sentences, of black and white housing standards, of minority and white health care, of minority and white educational systems. We must have a common good that provides rehabilitation as well as incarceration, insurance coverage as well as emergency room care, the education as well as the warehousing of students in poor schools. Happiness, we learn in the Beatitudes, requires us to be pure of heart, single-minded, true, to be tested. When the psalmist asks, "Who shall enter the temple?" the answer comes down to us across the generations quite clearly: those who have clean hands and a pure heart. These are the ones who see good everywhere and treat everything and everyone as also good, as also gift, as also greatly to be prized. They see God everywhere as well and refuse to cast an evil eye, to categorize people, to denounce other ways of doing the same things we do, but differently. They refuse to view the world through narrowed eyes and a wary heart. They are people who do not want to turn the United States into a guarded fort and our houses into bunkers and our lives into personal security projects, armed and alarmed and careful to the point of becoming prisoners in our own homes. They are politicians who do not want to spend the patrimony of the United States on becoming the modern military Sparta of a world more in need of the art and music, philosophy and literature of Athens. But as long as the country spends more on what they have the effrontery to call defense than it does on human development, our message to the world is clear. Our choice of common good is an armed one. In 2011, under what was being called a spending freeze and disengagement, U.S. spending rose another $30 billion, while not a penny of the $5 billion raised as part of the Katrina recovery program was spent to revive the lower Ninth Ward in New Orleans. But the United States is responsible for 41% of the military expenditures of the world and 58% of the total defense expenditures spent by the top 10 military powers of the world. To be clean of heart must mean keeping our eyes on a common good that raises our spirits and our dignity so that every level of society among us may be raised with us. It must surely have something to do with valuing people over party politics. And it must mean electing politicians who go to Washington to do more than talk about the good of the country, all the while obstructing its development. Happiness, the Beatitudes teach us, comes from being peacemakers. It calls us to seek reconciliation, not vengeance, not control. Call it an apology tour if you want to. But where I come from, they call it Christianity. To see the human community as a family for whom we are all responsible is the peacemaker's aim. The chance that an American who earned a bachelor's degree in 2008 will still be paying off student loans in 2028 is 1 in 3. 1 in 3. 1/3 of our present students will be in debt for the first 20 years of their professional life because we don't have money for education in this country. How does this generation get ahead that way? How do they raise a family that way? How do they save for retirement that way? How do they do what they need to do that way? We owe justice to our own children. What common good will we embrace to achieve that? And at the same time, the minimum number of people killed by CIA drone attacks in Pakistan in 2010 was 607. The number of those Pakistani we killed who appeared on a U.S. list of most wanted terrorists was 2. Go figure. This beatitude requires us to work with people, not against them, to oppose war rather than provoke it, to stand with the peaceful who seek peace, to raise our hands in cooperation rather than in judgment. What common good shall we embrace within ourselves personally to assure ourselves that peacemaking, not vengeance, is what we are about as citizens of the world? And finally, the Beatitudes conclude, you will be happy. You will be happy, even if persecuted for standing with the poor, for defending the oppressed, for supporting the causes of righteousness, because happiness comes from being true to the best ideals within us, from being true to the humanity of the entire human race, not simply to the security of our own. It comes from being the best human beings we can possibly become. If the common good is an overarching view of the way we want our world to operate, we have been given criteria by which to form it. It must be poor in spirit. It must be in grief for those whose lives are grievous. It must be humble in our relationships with others. It must be merciful in our responses. It must thirst for justice in all our dealings. It must be pure in heart about our motives and our behaviors. It must be a purveyor of peace and courageous and fearless in the positions we take in public in behalf of all these things. Then, like Tetzigan, we will have written the scriptures of a common good with our own lives. Then, as the old monastic teaches, it will be clear that we have kept our eyes on the important things in life and fashioned a common good that changes this wandering, weary world in the process. And most of all, remember, as the writer says, unless we work for the common good, there won't be any. The only question now then is, will we ourselves do our part of that process to which good Pope John calls us in Pacem in Terris when he says, every believer in this world of ours must be a spark of light, a center of love, a vivifying leaven. This world is calling us to bring light to it, to feel for it, and to change it. But remember as you go why you're doing it. You're doing it because time changes nothing. People do. And we're doing it because if the people will lead, eventually the leaders will follow. Thank you for coming.
Sister Joan wants to make sure people don't feel bad if they have to leave now or want to leave now, but she is glad to engage a few questions, but no guilt for those sneaking for other work. Is that fair? Do you want to field your own, or would you like?
That's okay.
Okay.
I'll take it.
Okay.
All right, go ahead. It's washable. Go ahead.
You made a statement, we don't have money for education, tongue in cheek, if you will. Jess said it's exactly what you're talking about. We have plenty of money for education. Look at our institution, such as Notre Dame, who has raised billions in endowment, billions, across the country, and yet we continue to raise tuition. So I go back and ask the question that you asked at the beginning. What is enough? What is enough? How much do we have to accrue in these bank accounts and continue on the backs of our children?
Well, you state, and quite correctly as far as I'm concerned, the basic American formative question. Most of our parents in our generation came out of a Great Depression. And we learned that you had to work hard, you had to save money. And there was nothing wrong with those ideals at that time. I mean, there were no safety nets. You know that. You have stories of uncles and aunts and parents who slept in tents and walked across the country and had no job for years and had 7 kids. All of those stories are real and they're all there. The problem is that became enshrined as the further we got away from real need. That goal is enshrined in us. It's still there. It's in all of us. You've got to get a good job. You send a kid to college, and God help them if they want to graduate in elementary art. You know what's said. My God, I sent him to Notre Dame, paid that money, and he's coming out to teach elementary art? You can't make any money in elementary art. I'm not wasting that kind of money on the next kid. Tell them now. So this stream is coming at us from all sides, breaking that chain. I really do not believe, knowing the people I know, the generosity that I myself have been the subject of when I've asked for this for the poor and that for the food pantry and this for the neighborhood art house and that for the soup kitchen. There's been nobody who said no. They aren't wrong about the fact that Americans are phenomenally generous. But what we have unlearned is enough. And it has invaded all of our institutions, church and state. You know, why do we have rich parishes and poor parishes? Because we have rich parishes. Because we really don't know how to distribute the goods. We don't know how to gather money for the community. We know how to get it for us. And somehow or other, that mentality will take a generation to really break down. But it is the rabbit. You've got to keep your eye on that rabbit. Because otherwise, you'll get nowhere, and you're simply going to die without enough, without enough, without enough. And it is not idealistic to think that what she is saying is impossible. It isn't. We're doing great things at the private level of education. Who would deny that? Certainly not I. I'm a product of it. But when I look around at the schools in our inner cities, and I know that if local officials say we've got to replace this school, we've got to hire 30 more teachers, we've got to get new books. Have you seen the books they're using? I don't know too many people who just open their wallets on the spot and say, well, let me lead that fund drive. And I don't know many institutions that set out to, we have developed, a part of our DNA is the sister city concept. That's a good beginning. We need sister schools. We need sister parishes. We need sister universities. We need this whole notion. I'm not going to get into who should do it. I mean, I know, as far as I'm concerned, it's just a false fight going on in the United States right now. It sickens me, you know, this whole notion of rugged individualism coming back into 2012. Get real. There is no such thing as rugged individualism, and I'll tell you how I know. My dad taught me. I always say that my dad was good Presbyterian. This guy learned to work, you know? And he had a good job. He was a welder. He paid every bill. Nothing was ever not paid on time. He had a high sense of truth and of justice. And when I was a little girl, he brought me up to know, Joe, he said, you can always get a job. You don't ever have to be without a job, and you don't ever have to be poor. Just remember, you can sweep a street or do dishes or dig a ditch. And I'm here to tell you that in the 40s, my dad was right. And now my dad is dead wrong. Why? Because machines sweep the street in our ghetto as they go by, and machines do the dishes in the hamburger joints, and machines are taking care of our washing. And the average person without an education just cannot go there and get a job, or the job they get, they're being used again. Someday historians will write of this period and what we've done to Hispanics and what we're doing to our own. Now we'll hire them. And now I know the situation on the other side too. This is not a rich versus poor presentation. This is an us versus us presentation. I meant it when I said, when we raise up our poor, our own land increases in value. Our own neighborhoods get better. The city gets better. And it's not going to happen otherwise. This whole question of whether or not the government should be doing anything. Well, how else are we going to get some of those things done if we don't get them started from both underneath and above? This is a topic, I believe, for a national conversation. As far as I'm concerned, I don't know who decided to do this lecture, but enthrone them. They are the saints of our time. I don't know anybody else who called together this many people to discuss this subject. Or why did you walk in the door when you see a topic like that? It's amazing to me. I've never seen too many miracles in my life till I saw you. This is a topic that lives and breathes on our streets, in our homes, in our institutions, as we were told, and it deserves a conversation in every parish, every institution, every auditorium, and I thank you for leading it. Now go home. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sister Joan, and she is willing to chat with you if you want to come up and talk to her. But she probably needs some more drinking water. We will supply her with that. And thanks to all of you. Once again, thanks to Bill Purcell, my colleague at the center, and Paula Mulhare, my colleague at the center, for helping to organize this. Also our guests for dinner tonight who are able to join us with Sister Joan at Geddes Hall. Thank you all very much. Have a great evening.